Welcome to series of psychoanalysis and history. So far, in society, history, pathology of dark colors in the big other, we have covered what is a societal pathology. Also, we explored about the different aspects and application of this social pathology in different eras. Welcome, sir. Namaste.
Namaste.
Sir, in our first part, we were looking under the lens about the World War II.
Right.
Right? With the same concept and the same lens, how would we see the Cold War?
Uh, Psychoanalysis always will underlie the pathological process either in an individual or a society-wide pathological process. Now, whether this pathological psychoanalytic process is created out of a individual dynamic or a social dynamic or both, that will differ. But there always will be a psychoanalytic dynamic to a historical process. Coming to the Cold War, let us see what happens in Russia, China, Cambodia. And we see almost a Holocaust kind of situation in all the three. We don't use
Mm.
the word Holocaust, but actually it was a Holocaust. Holocaust of one's own people. In Russia, Stalin killed almost 7 million to 12 million, depending on which survey you take. There came a situation where it was difficult to find good doctors in Moscow because good doctors would be called by Stalin. And if he had developed a paranoid fear that they are working for some of his enemies, they would be shot dead or sent to Siberia. And every day a list was given, okay, whom to send to Siberia today, whom to kill tonight. And every night, virtually hundreds were executed, hundreds were sent to Siberia. When Stalin died and the whole thing was taken into account, probably he had killed more Russians than Hitler had killed Jews. And the same went true for
Oh,
Mao. Mao probably killed more Chinese than Hitler killed Jews. Just that we don't use the word Holocaust, but they are there. Now the question is, uh, why does society not rise up against such mass spread thing? And that is where I feel ki apart from pathology that we know, we have to add a few more personality disorders. And one of the ones to add is what I call the authority anxiety personality disorder. And another is what I call the moha personality disorder. Moha is an Indian word for craving, attachment, or desire. If people are just too afraid to lose anything or to challenge authority or to take upon oneself any risk. And that also, I think, in extreme situations, if you still don't do it, it should be termed as a pathology. And this brings us to the communist crimes against humanity, the genocide and the Holocaust perpetrated by the communists. And this has something to do with the entire group of communists, that somehow the ideology predisposes them to perpetrating a social scale evil. And therefore, I would treat uh, the communism in action itself as a pathology. And it brings us to a larger question, is every ideology a pathology? And Freud would obviously say yes, because Freud always believed that all ideologies essentially try to recreate the perfect state which one found when one was experiencing bliss at the breast. And therefore, every ideology, in one sense, is a sublimated form of a regressive movement.
oh,
Slavoj Zizek, in his book The Sublime Object of Ideology, also talks by and large of the same thing. That ideology is a sublime object, a subliminal object, unconscious object, which can never be attained, and we believe we once had it, which may not be true. And based upon it, we have had a discussion before. It is titled The Dream We Never Had. That we are in search of something which we believe we once had, and we are in search of that perfect world through ideology. And therefore, many people term ideology as pathology. I don't completely agree with that, but many people do it. Another important point in the context of social pathology is this. There are two terms in engineering, optimization and maximization. Let us say you have a bike or a car, and you are driving your car and you want high mileage and high speed. It is not possible. If you drive the car at a very high speed, the mileage will be less. If you want higher mileage, you have to drive in the green zone 40 to 60. Then the speed cannot be high. If you want to go up the mountain and you want more power, or if you want to drag more load, you have to get into the lower gear. The lower gear will give more power, more torque, but less speed. So when we cannot maximize everything, there is a trade-off. And getting the trade-off to the best point is what we call optimization. Difficulty is people want maximization, they don't want optimization. They don't want to accept reality. They want a promise of heaven coming on earth. And this is such a strong desire that people will always be driven not by somebody who speaks the calibrated truth, but somebody who is poetic and promises heaven. And that being the case, the flame for heaven, the flame for a perfect life, the flame for omnipotence is rekindled now and again by somebody who is living out his own narcissistic pathology. And this in turn becomes the first raw material for releasing out a social scale pathology. Now, this flame is very important because there are two opinions on this flame. The desire for omnipotence, the flame of omnipotence, the flame of seeking a heaven on earth, the same flame of seeking perfect body and perfect life and perfect society. Some, like Buddha and Mahavir, always believed, and the pragmatist philosopher always believed, that all the best you can do on earth is optimization. And then you have to just accept optimization. Because the best is just not possible, you have to accept the best possible. And there is a very long distance between best and the best possible. And therefore, accepting the best possible is a strong reality acceptance. It's not easy. Because the best possible may not be exciting, it may be boring. It may not be anywhere near what our fantasy compels us to seek, or our seeking rather compels us to fantasize and look out for. So, many believe that we should settle for best possible and do reality acceptance there. And if you try to better the best, you end up into good. So best then becomes the enemy of better. There are some, like Sri Aurobindo, who believe that the laws of nature are not fixed, immutable. And we are not the last species. And therefore, sometime in future, a heaven on earth will become true. So there are two different opinions on this. However, what we see is that the core problem remains that people are not content with optimum and they are driven by the promise, the poetry of the maximum. And that allows the pathological leaders to unleash a social scale pathology. There's something about culture here also to be said. Cultures are very different when it comes to looking at something as pathology. Cultures are very different in accepting the losses in war, the pain in war, or how to look at value of a military target. Take, for example, the cultures of special forces, of commandos of, say, India and Russia. In India, the baseline is that when you go to a commando operation, whatever happens, never leave anybody injured on the other side. Even if the operation is to be cancelled, you have to bring back the person, bring back the person. So bringing everybody alive again becomes one of the core issues. In Russia, the difficulty is, the policy is very different. It is said that if somebody is injured and his injury is likely to obstruct the operation, then the leader has the duty to kill this person, his own man. And if the leader hesitates, the second in command is duty bound to kill that person who is injured and also the leader who hesitates. And if both of them hesitate, it is duty of the other members to kill both of them. And if all of them hesitate and they come back failed, the entire squad will be eliminated. Now, this kind of thing in Indian culture is very difficult to accept. Say, for example, the losses they can take, the Russians can take. No, hardly any other country can take those kind of losses. The kind of losses that Russians, Germans, and the Japanese can take. So there is something deep in the culture which allows pathology to be accepted as normal. There's also one more aspect of what, and we see all of this playing out in the Cold War. We see this social scale pathology playing out in Russia, in the purges, in China, in the Cultural Revolution, in the Great Leap Forward, in Japan, leading up to the nuclear attack, and then for years suffering from it. And yet being loyal to the same king and the same army. So we see in Cold War also this whole thing, the aspect of human pathology out in full display. In fact, in any group struggle, we see pathology in full display on a social scale.
So coming to our own culture, coming to Hindu history, how does pathology on a social scale play out in our sufferings over last 1,000 years?
The last 1,000 years we have suffered so much, it should be properly called the Hindu Holocaust. The greatest Holocaust in history, because the Jewish Holocaust went on for about 5 years, 5 to 6 years, and it killed approximately 15 million Jews. In our case, it has gone on for 1,000 years. It's still on. It has not closed. And Will Durant, one of the eminent historians of the West, puts the figure of the Hindu killings across the Islamic invasions at 8 crores. And that, in my opinion, is still an underestimate.
Oh,
And therefore, the kind of suffering that we have undergone is unparalleled in the world in terms of the Holocaust and every other pain that we have suffered. The point is, how could it come to happen? Because it was always a small number of people committing a Holocaust on a large number of people.
exactly.
Unless the majority is pathological, this cannot happen. And I always say that something called a Pap Samay precedes the Pralay Kal. That if this Holocaust is a Pralay Kal, then 100 years before this, we must have undergone the Pap Samay, where we must have done the wrong things, thought the wrong things. And the result of it was we became weak, disunited, and so on. And we actually cleared the ground for somebody to come and commit what he came and committed. So I would always hold ourselves responsible that our own deeds resulted in the Pap Samay and that resulted in the Pralay Kal. Now, what would those things be? The first
Hmm.
is too much of envy. Second, too much of narcissism. Three, too much of moha and anxiety of losing something. Fourth, saying goodbye to a sense of history and sense of geopolitics. Fifth, moving too much on the path of liberation and too little on the path of transformation. Sixth, not committing adequate resources to the military conquest and believing that on the other side of the border people are exactly like us. Seventh, having no Shatru Bodh, insight into the enemy's mind. How alien barbarians on the other side understand only the language of death and pain. You can't talk to them in terms of arts or science or love or compassion or spiritual attainments. The answer to a sword is a sword. It is not spiritual enlightenment. If somebody comes with a sword, there's nothing a spiritual master can do to save his own neck. Unless the spiritual master has believed to be on the path of transformation and has accumulated certain power. Otherwise, he would have just prayed to God to save him. He can't save himself. Now, we can still understand the first time it happens, but what about the repeated invasions? Except for Shivaji and Rana Pratap and a few others, we don't see many figures. And therefore, certain personality disorders would be there on the mass scale leading to the Pap Samay. And then the Pralaya. And some of them I have listed out. The first is narcissistic personality disorder. Second is sadomasochistic personality disorder. Third is, which is not there, but I would put it, the destructive envy personality disorder. The fourth, I would put it as uh, as a social orientation personality disorder. Fifth, I would put it as
Social orientation. Can you explain that?
where the mental world of the man becomes what his uncle or his niece are doing. His entire mind is absorbed in himself, his family, and his relatives and his friends. That's it. It's completely a social mindset. The man has no
Okay.
interest in politics, geopolitics, military history, sense of history, what's happening in the world, how do we protect ourselves, how do we expand the empire, what we are doing in science, what they are doing in science. He has no interest in anything except the social events involving himself, his family, and his relatives and his friends. And this is how the mindset of most Indians is, even today. They are not really interested in anything other than what goes on in their family, their relatives, and their friends. And they gossip around all day. So this I have put as social orientation personality disorder. That there is no intellectual orientation, no artistic orientation, no scientific orientation, no geopolitical, no military orientation. Right? The entire orientation is social. And this exclusive, almost near exclusive orientation is what I call a personality disorder. Then we have the negativistic personality disorder, always thinking negative. One more I have thought of is the moha personality disorder, being too caught up in desires and attachments that nobody is ready to go to fight. Everybody thinks, what will happen to my wife, my children? What will happen to me? Everybody will be enjoying. I will miss out on everything. I want to live. I want to enjoy. Then nobody goes to fight, and the result is what we have. That if we don't hang separately, we hang together. We have hung together for hundreds of times over the last 1,000 years.
Hmm.
One more thing I think is scientific thinking oppositional personality disorder. That the Hindu mind just does not want to think anything systematically.
Okay.
We want the freedom of impulse to do whatever we want to do at any moment. And this we see in small and medium industry also. Nobody wants a system. The owner wants a blank canvas where he can write anything he wants every day. And there is no system to take decision. Everyone has to go to the owner for every small decision. In Hindi they say कि मेरी मर्जी की मेरा यहाँ पत्ता भी नहीं हिलता. So this is precisely what they want. They don't want any system. And they are not in favor of anything scientific. Take the example of maintenance. No Indian company, organization, or home will spend any money on systematic maintenance. Nobody will do systematic maintenance of a washing machine or a car or an AC. It will be what I call
They believe in
management.
just breakdown maintenance.
Yeah, it's a breakdown management. It's a management by disasters. Never think of preventive or continuous maintenance. And we don't want to do anything scientific. The whole mind rebels, Indian mind rebels against anything systematic and scientific. So I call it the scientific thinking oppositional personality disorder. So these are some of the disorders where we did not do what ought to be done. And one very important thing, aggression was projected on each other rather than on the enemy outside. So instead of the aggression going on the other side of the border, it went over each other. And this dysfunctional movement of aggression is still there. So how to channelize this aggression from each other onto somebody outside, that remains as a challenge. So these are some of the disorders which were responsible for Pap Samay leading to the Pralay Kal.
So when we were mentioning in the beginning of the talk, especially in the part one, about the significant other, where does it apply to the Indians? Does it apply to why Indians succeed everywhere except in India? Is it the significant other which restricts their success?
So this is a old question, ki why Indian genes flourish only in external environments. That why the best of it is said ki the best Indians are abroad and the second best are working for multinationals. Given a choice, no Indian wants to work for another Indian for the simple reason we know each other. So this being the situation that everyone wants to either go abroad or work for an MNC, we don't want to work for each other because we know each other. And this, in another way put, would be that there is a pervasive pathology in society which does not allow talent to get fairly rewarded and unfairly rewards the non-talented. And this society-wide pathology, which then becomes a system, creates a situation where the best have to go abroad, and if they cannot work for the multinationals, which is almost like working for somebody outside India being in India. Because the culture of the multinational is still slightly different than the typical Indian culture. It's more like a Western culture. So this is largely because of envy, sadomasochism, and narcissism. That we create systems which don't fairly reward the deserving, unfairly reward the undeserving, and a kind of a non-judicial situation comes into play, and the best have to run outside. So it is true that society-wide pervading pathology even today is still creating the same situation. It has not changed.
Is there a possibility, like if we see the pattern passing from generations to generations, we Indians have been ruled by all narcissists, where we have been dealing with our own inferiority until date. We find them superior, their system superior, and that is the reason why we are more dedicated towards that end.
Correct. So what happens is it's a double thing. One, there is idealization, de-idealization. Idealization of the other and de-idealization of oneself. That is one factor, one psychoanalytic process at work. And the second is the factors I laid out, which create an unfair system. Because of which the best go abroad. So even if it's an Indian innovating, we look at it as an American innovation, even though it may be an Indian in America innovating.
True.
So that is how it happens. The pathology creates a pathological system, and therefore the best go out and the best happens outside. So when it comes to system creation, how the unconscious minds of people in society are, it's very important. And if the unconscious behaves more in accordance with the conscious and the superego, and they create a good system, this does not happen. Unfortunately, it's still on today in India. That we are still not a fair society. We are not an open society. We still lose the best to the outside.
So when we talk about all these big geopolitical movements which has taken place in the history, do other social evils also fall in the same line?
Yes, of course. Take the example in India of dowry, infanticide, abandonment of children on the railway stations. It's a huge problem. Human trafficking, torture, killing, rape. If people say Delhi is not a safe society, safe city for women, another way of saying it is कि Delhi is psychologically sick. Just another way of saying it. Yeah, psychologically healthy, healthy city will never be unsafe for anybody. So we see the society-wide prevalence of pathology in Delhi in large parts of India. Take West Bengal and the events that we see what is happening there. Mass scale society suffering from pathology and being acted out in the political area. And the same thing happened in Bengal even before independence of what the Jamindars did to the poor. And that's how the communism came up. In communism, instead of ending a pathology, substituted one pathology by another pathology.
Right.
And that is what happens when, on this point, Gandhi is right that what he used to say, sadhan and the sadhya, the goal and the means, that if the means are not pure, even if the goal is pure, the means will lead you to the goal, and then the goal will be distorted, and one pathology will be substituted by another. But as it is, we can also see Bihar, what used to happen in election and still happens. People used to say Bihar mein Bahar. And we all know what kind of violence goes on there. So large parts of India are largely a sick society, and that is not something unique. I always said that our species as such is a sick species. The real name is Homo seculus, not Homo sapiens sapiens, but Homo seculus. That our hardware is susceptible to be psychologically sick, and we have to make efforts to reduce sickness or come out of sickness. Unfortunately, the large other destiny or our own karma, or at times our free will, silences this movement and allows us to be captured completely by the unconscious. And we see those social scale pathological events coming up.
So does that our sickness dictate our government policy also?
Very much so. Look at the policy of appeasement. Look at what the government could not do when the pundits were thrown out. Look at what is happening even today in the case of infiltrators coming in. Look at no response to Pakistan for so many years. It's such a masochistic policy. Look at our policy towards Israel or towards UK. We cannot show our friendship to Israel, and we cannot show our animosity to USA or UK. Arun Shourie used to say a very good thing about India's foreign policy in the face of terrorism. And he used to say, वो जुल्म पर जुल्म करते हैं और हम शर्माए जाते हैं. And this is how our policy is. There is no masculinity, there is no virility, there is no proactivity, there is no readiness to sacrifice and stand for one's self-respect. It's always the most convenient, easiest way out. कि कुछ करना न पड़े, कुछ हो नहीं और निकल जाए किसी तरह से. So,
and do we name it as endurance and tolerance?
Yeah.
Sahishnutta, which we call?
We cover it up by those phrases. We rationalize it. And governance systems also are such that they want us to be accepted. They want us to accept ourselves as slaves, and we do it. We get the government what we get because we deserve it, because we have a slave mindset in our own minds, and that is because of pathologies in us. Society-wide pathology, where the society tolerates bad governance for 75 years, 100 years. So, unless we are psychologically sick on a mass scale as a society, this cannot happen. And this is where the difficulty is, that a few evil person can actually control the whole society, because rest of the society is too frightened, too selfish, too sadomasochistic. That we see in terms of events which happen. That one small time mafia boss terrorizes a city of 75 lakhs, 1 crores. And everybody is so afraid, nobody comes together to take on one person. Same is true for police, for all government officers and everybody. Take a case of all that has happened in COVID and all that has happened by allopathy. So many people have suffered. Nobody is asking for a Patients Justice Commission. Appoint a Patients Justice Commission from 1947 to present and ask everyone who has suffered from allopathic drugs or even side effects from Ayurvedic drugs or homeopathic drugs to come forward and lay their claims and assess them publicly and punish the perpetrators and reward the victims. Nobody would have guts to say, "Okay, appoint a Patients Justice Commission," because the whole pharma
No, but
lobby is against.
yesterday there was a news somewhere popping up that Navjot Singh Sidhu has talked out loud about the wife's cancer treatment using Ayurveda and everything in just 7 days. So now they have asked him to compensate by 800 crores for giving that statement against allopathy.
Right.
So how this pharma people are responsive when somebody talks about allopathy and other things,
So
while
so why not have them a taste of their own medicine? Appoint a Patients Justice Commission, ask everybody to come in with evidences, and make those who are ready to, those liable to pay the cost, and educate the public about the shortcomings of every system, including allopathy. And remove these laws which virtually give a carte blanche to allopathy.
allopathy. So when we see all this playing out, does it not then go to the childhood and the child's upbringing,
Obviously,
creating another sick generation?
a sick child comes out of a sick family. There will be very few who become sick because of a event trauma where the parents have nothing to do, or the constitution where regardless of what happens they would still go sick. That would be less than 5%. 95% of people, even if the constitution has a role to play, events have a role to play, a largest role comes from the family, especially in the first 5 years. So a healthy society cannot happen without a healthy family. And healthy family means healthy individuals and compatible individuals. And a benevolent big other, not a big other with dark colors. So if we look into pathology, the constitution plays a role, the family plays a role, the natural circumstances play a role. Say earthquake, many people got traumatized. To tsunami, many people lost parents and got traumatized. One's own karma, the uh, social development of personality disorders, and culture, all of them are important. Culture actually is the first preventive. It's the best psychological tonic we can think of for individual and society. Then psychoanalysis, spirituality, tradition, mythology, music, holistic healing, all these, they go into the culture design. And when we talk about social scale pathology, the preventive has to come from culture. There will be other elements of the preventive, but largest point will come from culture. And here there are two components. If you look at all cultures, either they are designed or they develop by default. And designed generally are better than those by default. or they are worse than those they are by default. And if we look at the design, it is either done by religions, and therefore we see designed by the three Semitic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, or by the Vedic culture. In Vedic culture, the good part is that we look at pluralism, the cultural pluralism. And this pluralism enables creating compatible cultural systems for correspondingly compatible group of individuals. And that provides a very good tonic and a preventive for psychological health. Good part is that for the first time in history, because of internet and communication, we can have a global cultural debate and have some enlightened, wise people to lead us and create a set of cultural systems and look at groups of individuals compatible with each of the system and try to manage all of them system related to each other in an optimum process. So this is something which can happen for the first time in history. Never has happened before. We only hope that it happens. It will take care of the dark colors of the big other. It will also take care of many things in the family and from constitution in an intergenerational way, and help us to overcome social scale pathology to a great measure.
Indeed. Hope something happens. Interesting conversation it was for me. Hope our viewers enjoyed it too. See you all soon. Namaste.
Namaste.